Hello YouTube. The next time you board a train in Eastern Europe, on some of the small stations, and perhaps Central Asia, and even in Russia, remember the story I'm going to tell you now. It's an ongoing investigation as far as I'm concerned, but it's one of the strangest phenomenon I have encountered in my research of the Eurasian paranormal. Among the strange phenomena that are found in Eurasia, ghost trains definitely comprise one of the strangest. Rail transport is one of the most energy efficient means of mechanized land transport known everywhere. One variety of the rail transport is a ghost train that passes through space and time and appears in different corners of our world. I have collected reports about such ghost trains and believe there are many more unreported cases, mainly due to the reluctance of the railroad professionals to discuss the unexplained phenomenon that has haunted European and Eurasian railways. There have been references to the eerie ghost trains in the Russian media, for example in the Trud newspaper, Technika Молодежи magazine, Совершенно Секретно newspaper, and other publications in the I would say in the 1990s mostly. There was a detailed article back in 1998 in Российская газета. But the phenomenon of the ghost train, поезд призрак in Russian, has reportedly been researched by a group of scientists from the Moscow State University. And I'll tell you about that research as well. But we need to start with Nikolai Gogol's skull. Captain of the first rank, Nikolai Cherkashin, a Soviet retired naval officer, a journalist, writer, and philosopher, has, according to the Russian writer Boris Tarakanov and the Georgian newspaper Svobodnaya Gruzia from 2002, he has collected a number of fascinating facts and stories regarding the ghost train phenomenon. Cherkashin has dedicated over 15 years of his life to the research of the phenomenon, and other writers had used his findings too in their own research. One of the stories is rather macabre. I added important details and information from the archives and other sources to the tale of the missing skull. And Cherkashin did a very good investigation, but there is a little bit more to it too. Nikolai Gogol was a Ukrainian Russian writer, and he wrote once the following: I am destined by the mysterious powers to walk hand in hand with my strange heroes, viewing life in all its immensity as it rushes past me, viewing it through laughter seen by the world and tears unseen and unknown by it. Gogol's plays, short stories, and novels rank among the great masterpieces of the 19th century Russian realist literature and Ukrainian literature. His books were full of unforgettable and often grotesque characters, eerie mysteries, and incredible occurrences. Ukraine was the setting for most of his works. Nikolai Gogol was born in Sorochince, Ukraine, and grew up with his parents in the country estate. His real surname was Yanovsky, but the novelist's grandfather had taken the name Gogol to claim a noble Kazakh ancestry. He was called Nikolai Gogol, Russian Dickens by many, and he died in 1852 and was buried in Moscow. The writer was considered to be insane at the time of his death. Gogol's life and death were full of strange occurrences. In his final years, Gogol fell under influence of the obsessive priest, Father Konstantinovsky, and burned sequels for Dead Souls, his famous novel. That happened 10 days before Gogol died from madness on March the 4th. The writer had refused to take any food, and various remedies were employed to make him eat. Spirits were poured over his head, leeches attached to his nose, and hot loaves applied to his person. there have been rumors that Gogol was buried alive. The writer was buried in the Svyata Danilov or Saint Daniel Monastery, the oldest monastery in Moscow, founded by Prince Daniel, Alexander Nevsky's son, in 1282, as an outpost against attacks by Mongol hordes on the southern approaches to Moscow. A rumor circulated that when the communists demolished the cemetery, Gogol's grave was opened and the remains were found lying by the badly torn coffin's edging. Some in Moscow believed that Gogol was buried twice. In 1931, during the early years of Stalin's regime, in the process of ransacking of the Svyata Danilov monastery grounds, the Soviets moved Gogol's remains to Moscow's Novodevichy cemetery. The monastery was later turned into a juvenile prison as the Marxist, Leninist anti-religious campaigns engulfed Russia, and the churches and synagogues were closed down or destroyed. When Gogol's remains were exhumed in order to be reburied at the Novodevichy cemetery, the Soviet authorities found his body without a skull. The rumors had circulated in 1931, and they attributed the theft of Gogol's skull to Alexei Bakhrushin, who died in 1929. This person distinguished himself as a collector of theatrical memorabilia. Later in life, Bakhrushin became an accomplished theater historian and transformed his collection of relics into a treasury of national and world theater, which he donated to the city of Moscow. He was a successful businessman and an honorary member of the Imperial Academy of Sciences. Now, allegedly, the story goes, Bakhrushin had incited two watchmen of the monastery's necropolis to steal the writer's skull in 1909. There were rumors that Bakhrushin also possessed the skull of Shchepkin, a famous Russian actor who died in 1863 and worked on the stage of the Malay Theater. About Nikolai Gogol. The rumors had finally reached Lieutenant Yanovsky, an officer of the Russian Imperial Navy and relative of Nikolai Gogol. The officer had threatened to shoot Bakhrushin during a meeting if the skull would not be returned to him. The theater aficionado relented, and Yanovsky left with a rosewood casket. He went on to Sevastopol, the Crimean port city where Yanovsky was stationed. Not longer after that, Italian Navy's mine layers arrived in the port city to take aboard remains of the Sardinian generals for reburial. Yanovsky handed the casket to one of the Italian captains, asking him to deliver it to the Russian consul general. In the spring of 1911, the Italian sea captain departed on a long voyage. Meanwhile, his younger brother, a student at the Rome University, together with a group of his friends, embarked on a train in Lombardy for a fun-filled journey. The student wanted to play a joke on his friends by scaring them when the train entered a very long tunnel. By that time, the captain was already in Italy, and his younger brother, who liked to play jokes, took the writer's skull with him to use for the fear factor. But just before the train entered the tunnel, its passengers inexplicably panicked. The student decided to jump off on the footboard of the train. He was the one who later told reporters about a strange, thick white cloud that had engulfed the ill-fated train. The student described the feelings of the inexplicable horror, fear, and panic felt by its passengers, and told them about the rosewood casket he had removed from his brother's study room. Out of 106 passengers of the vanished train, only 2 were able to jump off. The tunnel was later thoroughly examined by local authorities, but they did not find even soot from the engine's smoke. The entrance of the tunnel was sealed. A bomb struck the tunnel during World War II. That was in Italy. Now, on to Tarakanov's research. The writer Boris Tarakanov became keenly interested in the story of the mysterious ghost train, or the flying Italian, as some call it. He contacted Italian colleagues and they did their own investigation. It wasn't easy, but they did find out that a train disappeared in 1911. It was a 3-cab train rented for tourists by an Italian company, Sanetti. There were 106 passengers aboard. Only 2 were able to save themselves. There is a model of the train, some people say, in the storage of the Milan Railroad Museum. The investigators tried to find out what happened by studying the toy-like model, but to no avail. Boris Tarakanov discovered fascinating trail of the vanished train in Mexico. At about the time the train disappeared, papers of a famous Mexican psychiatrist were published. By the name of the psychiatrist, according to the Russian writer, is Jose Saxino or Saxino, but I could not find any mention of the name in my research. Now, the papers of the psychiatrist date back to 1840s. The papers mentioned a curious case of 104 Italians who spent a week in a Mexican psychiatric clinic because they claimed to have arrived in Mexico by train. Does it mean that the ghost train passes through time and space? Since the Italian train's disappearance, the skull of Nikolai Gogol travels throughout the world in a ghost train. It has been sighted on several occasions in Zavalichi, in the vicinity of Poltava, Ukraine, in the area where the famous writer was born. During World War II, just before Adolf Hitler's birthday, the ghost train had appeared on a top-secret single-track railroad leading to Hitler's headquarters in central Ukraine. The werewolf headquarters consisted of 20 wooden cottages and barracks and 3 bunkers. They're located about 12 kilometers north of Vinnytsia and 600 kilometers from Poltava. Also, an eerie ghost train was sighted in the railroad tunnel under La Manche. Neither Tarakanov nor I were able to find a geographical location Zavalichi in the Poltava region. Maybe it's due to the fact that after the fall of the USSR in 1991, so many geographical places have their names changed. Now let's go to 1991. There was another appearance of the ghost train in 1991 in the Poltava region. It was noticed and reported in 2 Ukrainian newspapers, Pravda Ukrainy and Slava Sevastopolia, in August of 1992. Yelena Chibrets, a monitor of the railroad crossing, confirmed the story where the train appeared on September 25 of 1991. On that day, a person named Lishchaty, a scientist from Kiev, and the chairman of the Anomalous Phenomenon Research Commission of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, waited for the recurrent arrival of the ghost train at the crossing. When the poised Prizrak appeared from nowhere, he jumped into the passing cab in front of several witnesses. The train, along with the Ukrainian scientist, vanished, and the man has not been heard from ever since. According to Forum newspaper, and as stated by a scientist named Patsy, the ghost train has been seen at the crossing after the incident more than once. But right now nobody wants to jump on it. The same newspapers described the appearance of the ghost train in Crimea during Khrushchev's rule in 1955 in the area of Balaklava. I told you about Balaklava in some of my other presentations. It was a very, very interesting place. The train passed over an old railroad embankment where the rails have been removed long ago. You see, in 1953 to 1963, I would say, in Balaclava, an underground factory was built for the service of the top secret Soviet submarines. The name was Object A25 GTS and also Object A20. And this was for the preparation of the submarines for the war duties. And of course, nuclear weapons have been stored there. The base was said to be virtually indestructible and designed to survive a direct atomic impact. During that period, Balaclava was one of the most secret residential areas in the Soviet Union. And in 1957, it was became part of the city of Sevastopol. After the World War, after the destruction of the Soviet Union in 1991, Balaclava became a less secretive place. Many things were stolen, and today it's just a tourist attraction. But in the Soviet period, you couldn't even speak about it because very few people knew. So that's where the train was sighted. Now, I want to talk about some scientists. The ghost trains have been reported by witnesses in Moscow, Novosibirsk, the Sakhalin Island in Karelia, and other cities and regions of the former Soviet Union, and in other parts of Eurasia. It has been invariably described as a steam engine of a non-Russian construction, with empty train engineer's cabin, 3 cabs with a closed window blinds, and some open doors. The other term used by Russian railroads for this phenomenon is неопознанный железнодорожный объект, or unidentified railroad object, URO. Such UROs have been sighted, according to the rumors, in the Moscow region as well as in the capital itself, 1975, 1981, 86, and 1992. Tarakanov had conducted a first-class research, but when he discussed this phenomenon with retired KGB officers, they quite seriously and confidentially advised him to be less interested in all of this. Stay away, basically. Ivan Patsey, a docent in the Moscow State University, headed a group of Russian scientists who became quite interested in the phenomenon. A physicist and a mathematician, he's an expert in the area of topology, and some of his books are available on the Amazon, from what I know. Topologists are mathematicians who study qualitative questions about geometrical structures. Topology is the mathematical study of the properties of objects that are preserved through deformations. It is a branch of pure mathematics related to geometry. Topology has to do with the study of spatial objects, such as curves, surfaces, the space we describe as our universe, the space-time of general relativity, objects with some of the same basic spatial properties as our universe. The group included a railroad expert, a philosopher, and people of other professional backgrounds. I have not heard lately about the group. Most of the information goes back to the middle to late 1990s. So I cannot tell you what's going on right now, but I do have information from before. There was a Russian scientific expedition headed by Patsy, and they had conducted field research in the area of the large railway junctions of the Baranovich and Pskov, where ghost train has been sighted. Patsy points out that the railroads of Eurasia and the rest of the world form the largest planetary structure created by human beings. The gigantic network of railroads have to possess a physical influence on the flow of worldly time. He believes that any considerable transformation of space causes temporal anomalies. Time is a special coronal field inseparably linked with the electromagnetic power engineering of space. Patsy's expedition had discovered a law of conservation of time. The time that was spent does not disappear, according to them. Patsy's group also recalled the deadly Messina earthquake that took place in Italy on December 28, 1908, when approximately 100,000 people perished. The 7.5 magnitude earthquake could have caused a huge crack in the coronal field. If the Messina wandering coronal hole projected itself on the mountain tunnel of great length, it could have moved the train from the usual space into some other space. Because the movement of the object was determined by hard spatial coordinates, that would be railroad tracks, the object can appear only where the tracks had existed in the past or where they would exist in the future. There is more to Patsy's spatial temporal theory, the geochronology, black holes, and railroads, and perhaps someday his ideas will be published and translated into other languages. But let us look at other reports about the mysterious ghost train. In Ukraine in 2002, Vyacheslav Fomenko was a TV operator in Zaporozhye. He was coming home one Saturday from a fishing trip. About 11 in the morning, he came to the Plavny railroad station. About 50 meters from the station, he saw a train that appeared from nowhere. 6 or 7 antiquated train cabs baffled him. His first thought was, where did they come from? There was no one at the station but Fomenko. The weather was clear. The train looked absolutely real. Fomenko became afraid. He snapped out after hearing the sound of train wheels. A freight train was approaching the ghost train on the same tracks. It seemed that a collision was about to take place, but several hundred meters before the impact, the ghost train disappeared into thin air. When Fomenko told the story to his colleagues, they laughed at him. But the men insisted that he was not drunk and of sound mind. And he wasn't known for being a practical joker. 7 years before that, in Ukraine in 1995, something else happened. And that's Fomenko also found out about this. On July 14, 1995, the head of the Kiev Psychiatric Hospital, Master of Medical Sciences, Pavel Andreychenko, was treating a very strange patient. Anton Gnatyuk was a 40-year-old warrant officer and a commander of a radar platoon. His story echoes the event observed by Fomenko. Gnatyuk, coming from a work trip, was able to purchase tickets for the train departing the next morning, but he had no money to stay in a local inn. The warrant officer made an arrangement with the train conductors to spend the night in one of the passenger cars stationed in the RIP tracks. That's a spur or siding with the facilities for repair and place maintenance. He found there a strange train that looked to be of a pre-World War II construction. It looked even more antiquated, he said. So Gnatyuk decided to sleep inside one of its cabs, but when the warrant officer touched the handle of the cab's door, he was knocked out by a powerful electrical shock. The train vanished into thin air, and Gnatyuk barely survived the ordeal. Now I want to talk about some unexplained deaths. Russia's huge land area and harsh conditions in the winter made transportation a constant headache for the people who have lived there. The first railways in Russia appeared in the 18th century. The building of railways is relatively easy because most of Russia is flat. In 1917, the network of railroads had a total length of 70,300 kilometers, and 80% were in the European part of Russia. In 1978, the length of the railways in the USSR was 141,400 kilometers. The railways are often the only link between industrial and agricultural centers because there are few good roads in the huge country. You need to understand the vastness of Russia. And I remember riding those trains and the open space all around you. And the only link to civilization was the train cabin you're on. I've traveled a lot in the Soviet Union in my youth. There was a Siberian newspaper, Novaya Obozrenie, and it published an article in February of 2002. Remember the year again, 2002, about strange incidents that had involved Russian railroads. There was a very unusual incident that happened not far from Balakovka village of the Vologda region. On the 15th of September in 2001, a group of mushroom gatherers approached the rail tracks leading to an abandoned peat mine. Lying on the tracks was a torn body of a man. Several meters of the railroad ties, or also called sleepers, were covered in blood. The impact was so great that the male's body was broken into pieces. 2 women fainted after seeing the corpse. When the official criminal investigation into the death of a Russian John Doe under the train, when it was opened, the Russian detectives were shocked to learn that the abandoned railroad branch line has not served any trains for 20 years. The ties were covered with rust and overgrown with vegetation. The cause of death of the John Doe found on the rail tracks has not been determined so far. One thing is clear: only a train traveling at a great speed could have maimed that person to such an extent. The nearest working railroad is located 20 kilometers away. But if there have not been any trains at the abandoned branch line, then what killed him? No less mysterious case happened 3 months before in a former Soviet republic in Central Asia, now an independent country called Turkmenia. Hamurat Berdiev, the minister of Turkmenia Railroad Service, perished on the 14th of June 2001. He was only 41 years old at the time. Although his death was uncanny, the Russian media had ignored it. The only media mentioned besides Novaya Obozrenie mentioned that it was in Turkmenia, and the website doesn't exist anymore where I found it. Berdiev conducted an inspection close to the Ashgabat locomotive depot. The official line was that the unfortunate minister did not notice the approaching locomotive train and perished under its wheels. But according to the persistent rumors that have circulated ever since among the Turkmen railroad workers, the locomotive engineer of the train that allegedly ran over Berdiev claimed that some powerful force brought down the minister before the maneuvering locomotive reached him. The investigation conducted by Turkmen Prosecutor's General Office did not pay attention to the engineer's testimony, but the investigators also ignored the fact that the diesel locomotive did not have any traces of the impact, no traces of blood, no microfragments of clothing. Yet the autopsy had determined that the minister died after being hit by a locomotive, and his injuries had corroborated that fact. Thousands of people perish in Russia and the former Soviet republics in the railroad-related cases. Many of them die mysteriously, just as John Doe of Balakovka or the Turkmen minister. Experienced Russian railroad professionals do not like to discuss such cases. One of them, Vladimir Donskoy, had 30 years of experience driving electric trains in the Moscow region. 6 tragedies had occurred during his long watch. 3 were easily explained by consequences of alcohol consumption among Russian youths, but the other 3 he could neither explain nor forget. When a person stands near the edge of a platform and a train races past him or her, it is easy to be sucked under the wheels by the vacuum. The moving train creates a vortex that sucks the objects on the track and under the wheels of the train. It is the sucking under or pulling towards phenomenon, as it's called. Most of those sucked under were standing in the front part of the platform because the train is still moving at speed. They were always sucked under the second cab. Such is the law of physics, according to Vladimir Donskoy, who had seen 3 people sucked under the trains he was driving even before he reached the station. A person standing near the edge of the platform would be pushed back by a wave of thick air. The person tries to keep the equilibrium, pushing the leg downwards, and thus pushes himself under the train. When the wave disappears, the person is caught up in the rarefied air zone. 3 such deaths, personally observed by Donskoy, had convinced him that the criminal investigators from the Russian police were wrong to disclassify them as suicide. The detectives were highly unhappy and clearly showed their mood to him after the train driver visited relatives of the deceased and told them that what he saw was no suicide. Vladimir Donskoy was concerned with the mystical aspects of the deaths and consulted other Russian locomotive engineers. All of them had concurred that on occasions an invisible wave appears in front of the train at a distance of approximately 70 meters. The force of the wave is so powerful as to create an impression that the costly locomotive moves in front of the observer's train, a ghost train of sorts, the invisible train that sucks people under. Now let's talk about Moscow. As well as being one of the most efficient and cheapest underground transit systems in the world, the Moscow metro, or the subway, is also undoubtedly one of the most beautiful. It's called Moskovsky Metropolitan. Moscow subway system is the main public transportation of the Russian capital, carrying over a half of the city's passengers. Many metro stations and ticket halls represent historical, cultural, and architectural monuments. It was opened in 1935, and it was the first underground railway system in the Soviet Union. As of 2017, the Moscow Metro has 203 stations, and its route length is 339 kilometers. There are numerous stories about ghosts and paranormal phenomena pertaining to the Metropolitan. Unidentified biological entities and gigantic rats are outside the scope of this article, but the persistent legend of the ghost train is of interest to us, as it has been for the Muscovites. The ghost train travels along the circular branch line. The train is of the type that has been manufactured in the 1950s and 1960s. It stops at every station, but in most cases the doors do not open. The ghost train is easy to recognize. It exudes cool air and icy horror. In the train cabin, one can see a train driver, dressed in the 1950s uniform. There are many people aboard the train, wearing gray uniforms. Their faces always look tired, because, as it is said in Moscow, they are souls of the workers who had built the metropolitan tunnels in the Soviet times and died there. Their souls wander along the circular branch line, unable to find peace. The ghost train never interferes with the general schedule and always appears unexpectedly. If someone does see it, he or she is advised never to approach it, so that the person's soul doesn't get trapped in the eternal travel along the branch, like those of the perished workers. This legend has been retold in Moscow, in one form or another, for many years. One version describes the ghost train as a rusty and worn-out entity that has no passengers aboard, because of the crash it had many years ago. according to some of those who had built the Metropolitan. And all the passengers had perished. And ever since, the ghost train reportedly has haunted Moscow's underground. But there are other ghost trains that are tangible and quite real. There were, and soon will be again, other ghost trains, shrouded in secrecy, but certainly they are no mere legend. Very few people ever saw them, and some of those who did never suspected the deadly cargo they were carrying. The secret missile trains, or strategic missile trains, look like regular passenger trains, but they had false windows and superb defense measures, and there were never any hurdles to their smooth travel, as the country's railroads fully cooperated with the military command. The Soviet Union began testing a missile train armed with the solid fuel missile back in 1983. The train was able to travel more than 1,000 kilometers per day without being detected, and it could launch missiles from any point along its route. Every missile was equivalent to hundreds Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs and could strike the target 10,000 kilometers away with extreme precision. The missile train regiment included a train consisting of 3 locomotives and 7 rail cars, with 9 platforms carrying missile launchers. These missile trains were expected to become the core of the counter-strike group because of their improved durability and their ability to withstand a first enemy strike. The 1st Regiment, armed with the Molodets missile, went on the combat duty in October of 1987. By 1999, there were 3 missile divisions with 4 regiments each. The trains were kept in stationary shelters located 4 kilometers apart. When on combat duty, they were dispersed. The Molodets Soviet missile only performed actually 1 live launch throughout its entire history during a military exercise. It was fired from a central Russian region and hit a target at Kamchatka, on the far east end of the USSR. The US military were unable to track down the train's coordinates before or after the launch. But according to the Russian military, the Americans were quite afraid of the Soviet military ghost trains, fearing them even more than the RS-20 ICBM missiles, and spent more money tracking those trains than the cost of the entire Soviet program to build the trains. Russia decommissioned its railway car-based missiles and destroyed all the systems as part of the START II treaty, a nuclear arms reduction with the United States. The new START treaty that came into force in 2011 does not limit the use of the railroad car-based systems and allows Russia to restart production. And Russia's leaders have made the decision to start the development of a military railroad missile complex for the strategic missile forces, as a response to the perceived threat the European missile defense systems would present. And the year that it would all start was 2020. Research and development of the missile-carrying trains for Russia's future, I think it's called Barguzin Combat Railway Missile Complex, also referred as the nuclear train for its transportation and launch of strategic nuclear missile, is in progress, according to Russian media. The Barguzin Complex intercontinental ballistic missile had a successful pop-up launch test in late 2016, and further flight design testing may begin in 2017. The commander of the Russian strategic missile forces said the nuclear train is expected to be deployed in the strategic missile troops in the year of 2020 and assume combat duties. The Cold War may restart and bring the old ghosts, including trains, back to life. And that is scarier than any ghost trains traveling along the tracks in Europe or Asia. Of course, railway transport is still one of the safest means of transport. It is just that some aspects of it may not always be explained in a conventional way. And there may be more reports of the ghost trains in Ukraine, Russia, and Asia. Thank you.